cerebral palsy and autism spectrum disorder. And so we are going to maybe get to know a little bit more about what that is all about. But that just makes me be so given to this topic. And I'm also a pastor who deals with children from all angles of lives. And so some of them come and they are actually children living with disabilities. And so I know that this is a special topic and it's a very good topic for us to be able to engage in. And so that is what we are going to be talking about this afternoon. Now, when we are talking about special needs, some people prefer to call it special needs, some people prefer to call it disability, some people prefer to call it differently abled. And so when we are going to be talking about that, we are going to be addressing all that at a go. And apart from that, we'll try to understand what is this special needs? What is this disability or differently able that we're talking about? But then we will also go beyond that and look at then what is our responsibility if we have children living with special needs, children living with disabilities, children who are differently abled than the normal, then what is our responsibilities? And what are the opportunities that there are in our families? Because God has specially placed us in specific families where we are and these children are. So what are the opportunities that are presented therein? And so to begin with, let's just begin by, understanding a little bit more about disability or special needs or differently being abled differently and how we can define all that. Now, the two extensive models that have been regularly used in defining disability are socially and medically. We have the social model and we have the medical model of defining disabilities and, making, to getting to understand what special needs are all about. Now, for social models, this is where disability is a social construct. And so for the social model, the problem is the disabling society. And this is a model that sees that the society is the one that ends up disabling the child or disabling the person that we tend to say that they have a disability. And then we also have the medical model where for the medical model, the problem is the disabled individual. They look at the science and then they are like, because science says it is this person who is operating differently from the norm from how we have known or how science defines a person to function. And so that model looks at the person and the individual as the problem. Now, I'm not going to go so much into those models, but just to give us a little bit of a glimpse into what goes on in the background on how we end up, seeing or viewing disability and how we end up understanding disability. But then we also have a third model that, religious circles have come up with, and they're like, well, maybe instead of looking at the society as the one being disabling to the individual, or instead of looking at the individual as the one having the problem, what about going back to our faiths and then be able to, look at it probably is the divine will of God or the divine for the individual to be as they are. Now, that is not what we are going to dwell in this afternoon. But what I wanted to drive at is that whichever model you use to define disability, define special needs, the underlying factor is that the child or the individual experiences some degree of limitation and can hinder their engagement in normal activities, in the day-to-day life that we go on with. And so that is just what we want to understand, that whether you look at the society and see the society as the one that is disabling, whether you look at it and you think, no, it is the individual who actually has, some, maybe impairments and all that, or whether you want to look at it and look at it and say it is the divine will of God for the individual to end up being the way they are or have an impairment, the underlying factor is that this person experiences some degree of limitation that hinder their engagement in the day-to-day running activities of life. And also something that I want to let us know, viewers, is that now not all disabilities are actually physical. Some disabilities are not physical. And so just looking at a person with your bare minimum eyes when they stand before you, you may not be able to tell whether they are actually disabled or not. And that does not mean that you actually neglect this person or you actually brush away or aside their disability, or you make light of their disability simply because they are not on a wheelchair or it's not physical, or per se. Some disabilities are physical. It could be a physical impairment, but at times some of them are also hidden. And so some of them look like, just the normal perfect body that you will see. There is no deformation for some, in their physique. For example, have a look at that picture. The picture, we are three of us standing there. Now, out of those three people, one of us in that picture is actually disabled, or they have an impairment. They are special needs a person. There's one of us among the three of us in that picture that actually has a special needs. They are differently abled. By your look in the picture, I bet you cannot be able to tell who among the three of us there has special needs. And so that's why I'm saying that some disabilities, actually, the impairment is internal. The impairment is on the brain. There are injuries on the brain. And so the impairment is not physical. But not being physical, that does not mean that they are actually less disabled. If anything, they may actually be more in need of more support than the physical disability or the physical impairment. And so I'm going to dwell a little bit more on that. Why? Because most of the time that those are the impairments that we have not so much been aware of, and so as a result we don't even know how to handle them when they present themselves in our lives or in the lives of our children or in the lives of our family members. And so when it comes to our families, it's a whole new thing, and we don't even know how to maneuver around or navigate around it. Now, let me begin by mentioning that studies around the world indicate that there is an increase in neurodevelopmental disorders. Now, neurodevelopmental disorders are those disorders that I'm talking about, and I'm saying that they are actually happening on the brain. And there is an increment in that. There is an increase in neurodevelopmental disorders in children, which are comprised of physical, mental, emotional, sensory, and even communication impairments. So that for some of them, even physically, they end up being impaired as a result of an injury on their brain. For some of them, they even mentally, they become impaired as a result of that injury on the brain. Now, these neurodevelopmental disorders, they continue to be part of the main causes of children's disability, leading to life drawbacks and forming the leading cluster of children who remain out of social and learning circles, as well as causing even their deaths. Children who actually have neurodevelopmental disorders, they have more high mortality rates than the rest of the children. And it's good for us to be aware of that. Now, when we talk of these disorders, what exactly do we mean? What we mean is that these disorders arise from impairments in a developing brain. A child's brain is still developing. And so these are impairments that arise from, you know, an impairment in a developing brain and or the central nervous system. So it could be the brain or the entire central nervous system or both. And so they affect a child's behavior and ability to learn. And so how a child behaves and the ability to learn, it gets affected. Now, children living with these neurodevelopmental disorders and impairments may exhibit problems with motor skills, you know, with their conduct, with their recollection, with their learning, with their language and communication, or other nervous system functions. Because you see, when we talk about speech, this, I don't know if my cursor, you can be able to see it, but there is a part of the brain, this area, it is the part that controls speech. And so if it's the area of speech that is affected, that child, you find that their speech is hindered. If it is actually the cortex area, the somatic sensory cortex area, then you'll find that they have an, you know, a problem, an issue with their sensory. You find if it's, you know, the gustatory area, then their taste buds are affected. You know, it could be the visual area where their sight is affected, or at times even the auditory area where then their hearing ends up being impaired in one way or another. Now, examples of neurodevelopmental disorders include, but are not limited to, impairments such as cerebral palsy, children that will find they have cerebral palsy, autism spectrum disorder, you know, hyper active disorder, dyslexia, and the like, and even intellectual disability. And there are many more to that. And so these children all find themselves suffering from a neurodevelopmental disorder because it is a disorder on the neuron, or, you know, or the nervous system. Now, the conditions displayed, they could inhibit the typical development and the child's efforts to be able to relate to the people in their spheres, such as family and peers. And so this child, yes, would be the family, but then how they relate to the people around them is a little bit different. And so that delays them in reaching the ordinary progressive milestones, like acquiring independence and self-caring skills, relating with peers, and being able to learn in even formal schools, or even just being able to navigate around their house chores, you know, where they live. Diagnosis and treatment of these conditions can be challenging. Let me say that. And I say this because I'm telling you, because number one, I've already mentioned that I'm a parent of a child growing up with neurodevelopmental disorders, and she is multiple and has a cerebral palsy and autism spectrum disorder. And so from what she's 10 years old now, and it is a journey that we have had the practicality experience part of it, but it's also a journey that because of her, I've decided to go to school and be able to acquire more knowledge in this area. And so I did my PhD, and my PhD is in child development and family studies, and with a focus on disability, neurodevelopmental disorders to be specific. And so I know that diagnosis and treatment of these conditions can be quite challenging. And management of neurological disorders and impairments usually comprise a blend of professional therapy, pharmaceuticals, and home and school-based programs. So it is a place where we all come together to try to see how best to help this child, how best to support them to be able to navigate the challenges presented. But one thing that is for sure is that although the symptoms and characteristics of neurodevelopmental disorders and impairments ordinarily change as a child develops, some infirmities are actually permanent. Some of them end up being permanent. And you see, one thing that is also there is that neurodevelopmental disorders are increasingly prevalent across the globe. But even though they are increasingly prevalent, they are nonetheless poorly understood by most people. A number of us have actually do not have, you know, enough exposure or do not have much know about neurodevelopmental disorders. And so the lack of knowledge is further compounded by the stigma that often accompanies a diagnosis of a developmental or behavioral disorder. And so many children living with neurodevelopmental disorders do not experience similar opportunities as other regular children to be nurtured, to be able to grow, to be able to appreciate community and experience relationships and interactions in many facets of life, family included. They are left out in most of the times. And you find that some disorders such as autism spectrum disorder, cerebral palsy, and intellectual disability are not socially acceptable even in church circles, so to speak, or religious communities. Even if I didn't say church, but religious community as a whole. So the consequences of the lack of acceptance not only lead to stigmatization, but this enormous stigma significantly restricts access to professional attention and care. And so thus decreasing the quality of life for these children living with neurodevelopmental disorders. Now, lack of acceptance and care leads to severe difficulties and complications. It also leads to social seclusions and leads even to premature death. Ask yourself, for example, how many times do we have a child living with neurodevelopmental disorder being invited for simple family get-togethers like birthday parties, when we have actually had birthday parties for our children? How many times do we go out of our way to remember to invite a child, you know, with special needs, a child with cerebral palsy, a child with autism spectrum disorder, a child, you know, with intellectual disability? When we have thought of taking maybe children to have fanfare and fun games and all that, how many of us go an extra mile to think about a child, you know, with a disorder and include them, a child with disability on a wheelchair, and just see how they can also be able to access those fun events and fun activities on a weekend afternoon, you know, when we organize for such, or when we, you know, do that. And so these children, they end up being socially secluded and lead a lonely life, a life that, you know, is just on their own. And it's even that alone help, you know, just pushes to their, you know, to their, it's detrimental to them, so to speak. And sadly, these children are excluded from the life formation programs, as we either ignore their presence or surrender to the fact that we cannot understand them. Either we are actually surrendering to the fact that we cannot, you know, understand them or know how to navigate around with them, or we have just decided to turn a blind eye and ignore their presence in our lives. And that's why then it's important for us to think about them and talk about them. And that's why I'm saying it's good. We are talking, let's bond as families and let's remember the place of the child with disability in our families. And I want you maybe to just think about it in the public chat that is there. Just think about it. What does disability mean to you? Just in one word. When you think of the word disability, or when you think of the word, you know, differently abled, or when you think of the word special needs, what comes into your mind? You could just write, you know, with one word, just be able to put that there. Even as we go on. You see, some people, when they think of disability, they are thinking of bad omen. Some people, when they think of disability, they're thinking maybe it is sin. Some people, when they are thinking of disability, they are thinking probably it is a punishment or something. The society is harsh with preconceived ideas, mistreatment, and quite often than not, handling special needs children without love and commitment. And with this kind of an attitude, we are better placed to address the whole issue of enhancing their sense of belonging, beginning from the family front. To the best of my knowledge, all children have the potential to thrive in learning environments responsive and sensitive to their diverse needs, and families should explore strategies and mechanisms that will support the move towards inclusion of these children in the large family systems. Every child can learn. There is no child who cannot learn. The misconceptions that the society has given us is that, number one, they link disability and special needs children to cultural perceptions that seem to see them as a curse in the community. And so when somebody gets a child with special needs, they begin thinking that you see, maybe it's a result of the misdeeds of the parents, and that's why this child has been born with a disability. That is a misconception. Some misconceptions, include not being interested to bother themselves with the burden of attending to the children with special needs, since they have numerous demands. We actually just say they have numerous demands, and so the only thing is to do is to actually ignore them with their demands and decide to shun them. Some of us harbor in a sense of guilt and refuse to identify ourselves with these children with special needs as a way of running away from shame and disgust. We don't want to be seen anywhere near somebody who has an impairment. And some of us lack preparedness on how to handle and act as caregivers to special needs children. We don't know, we are not prepared for the same. And so when it comes, we abandon it because we tell ourselves we don't know how to do it. And some people, it's just biomedical factors, and some even run to to divine and say it is sin and punishment from God. And so we say, since it's God who has actually punished and our sin, so we abandon the person. All these are just misconceptions. Disability fundamentally interferes with learning and information processing for some people, and while for others it might be actual physical access. For some people it could be physical access, and so maybe they are impaired physically, but for some people it is how they actually decode information and process information. It is mental injury on the brain and all that. And how it is that at the end of the day, all of us actually have a way in which we decode and process information. Every human being has a way in which they decode and process information. We all have inputs where the words are spoken, we see things and all that, and as the input comes in, then we actually decode information, and then we process information, and then that results to our output where we are able to give back feedback. Now, it happens so differently in each and every one of us. Input as we see, as we hear, as we touch, as we smell, as we taste. And then the information process is the attention we give to it, the sensory input, the decoding, the processing, which, how we store information, how we retrieve the information and all that, encode and get to the physical output where we are able to speak, where we are able to act, and where we are able to write. Now, the way you and I do it is different probably from a child who has special needs do it. They still get the inputs, They still get the basic information process and they still get the output. But how we do it is differently from how they do it. Now, in our world, and that's why I'm saying two worlds, two minds, two worlds. Why? Because in my world and your world, we look at these children and we think they are impaired. And that's why they are not decoding and, processing information the same way you and I are doing it. But in their world, you are actually the one who is upside down. You are the one who is decoding differently from the way they are doing it. And so to them, you are actually disabled. But because most of the time they are the minority in our families, it could just be one child in our family, and maybe we have 2, 3 of them that are actually thinking and processing the same way we do. We actually end up disempowering this child, and as a result, the disabled child or person feels that they are disempowered, they are vulnerable, and they are abused. Why? Because they are a minority and their voices are often shut by the majority, who tend to think that they are the ones who are disabled, while in the world of this child with disability, you are the ones who are doing things differently from them, and so you are equally disabled in their world. Think about the scripture, John chapter 9, verse 1 to 5, as I move away from just helping us to see disability and come to the place of what then is our responsibility. John chapter 9, verse 1 to 5, the scripture says that as they passed by, they saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, it was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Now, Jesus calls us to be inclusive in our families. And not just in our families, but wherever we are found. Who is Jesus referring to when he said we? He is saying we. We must. Who is he referring to when he says we? What is the task that is assigned there? Who has assigned us this task? And when is the assignment due? Why are you a parent of a child with special needs? Why you in particular? When Jesus says we, it means he's part of the equation. He has given you this child as, to you. Why are you a sibling to a child with special needs? Why are you a caregiver to a child with special needs? Who placed you in that family? Is it not God? And who has placed this child in that family? Is it not God? And so we must know that these children, they are there. And they are there not because it is any person's, you want to say maybe it's the parent who sinned that, God knows. And he has done that his works might be displayed even through this, child. What skills has God given you to bring all the members of that family to his knowledge? All the members, including the child with disability. Children with disability have a similar hunger for worship. They have a similar hunger for growth. They have a similar hunger for direction. They have a similar hunger for support as able-bodied children or as able-bodied members of our families. And so when we are asking ourselves, why should we be talking specifically about being aware of our child with special needs? Why this task? It's because they are no different from the others. They have the similar needs like the rest of the children in the family. Children with disabilities have the same longing for community. They have the same longing for relationships. They have the same longing for belonging like able-bodied children. And so as parents or a parent and a caregiver, you are obligated to help them meet that hunger and longing by loving them, by welcoming them, by serving them as Jesus would, and by doing what we can to satisfy their physical, emotional, social, and spiritual needs. Why this task? Our open relationship with children who are disabled in family settings speaks loudly to others. An inclusive family serves as a model to the community. An inclusive family helps to remove barriers and lead to change in cultural understanding of disability. An inclusive family recognizes that differences in ability are natural and that we are all interdependent. We are interdependent. These children are actually just like any other person in the family, and they can equally also serve the rest of the people in the family. So what are the possibilities do you see in children with disabilities in your family or in your community? Think about the opportunities. God has given us possibilities and opportunities, and they are there. The purpose of God, a disabled child in your life, in your family, in your community, actually presents the purpose of God to you. This purpose was set before the child was born. Are you able to look at that child and be able to ask yourself, what is the purpose of God that God is actually helping me to see through this child? Get to see that. A disabled child or child with special needs in your family is also presenting an open invitation for you as a parent, as a sibling, as a caregiver to see and experience God at a personal level. As you do that, you are able to actually draw closer to God. As you actually allow God to manifest himself and prevail over the situation of this child. This child also shows you how God uses disability to dramatically remind us that God's ways are not our ways. God is not what we expect. God, you see, this child is also actually created in the image of God, just as you are created in the image of God. This child with disability will teach you about peace and joy that flows from open dependence on God, as you come to realize that there is nothing in your own power that you can do probably to fix that disability and to make this body function perfectly as yours is functioning. And so you actually realize that this child is actually also functioning perfectly at their own level as the Lord has enabled them. A child with disability will make you get redeemed eyes to see the possibilities in you and other family members in going an extra mile to embrace somebody who actually functions differently from how you function. A disabled child will make you discern the humanity and dignity of children with disability and the vulnerable in the society. And let me also say that a disabled child will make you recognize your own vulnerability, weaknesses, and limitations. And realize, by the way, that we are all candidates of actually functioning differently in any, this can catch up with you at any point in life. You can actually, find yourself, having an impairment at any point of your life. And so it shows you how vulnerable we are as human beings, how weak we are, and how limited we are. And so what do I say at this? Begin to look for the possibilities by incorporating these children into your family activities. Then you will know what God is doing. Allow the disabled child to wipe a table in the family, so they feel that they belong. They feel that you appreciate their efforts, that they are actually also contributing positively to the being of that family. Pray, allow them to pray for the meal. Some of them, I have said, they have language barrier. Like my child is 10 years old and she's nonverbal. I tried to do speech therapy and I've been doing, and I still do. But then I realized she has language on her brain, but she's not able. She has receptive, but she does not have expressive language. And so what have I done? I've decided to go into her world and decided to learn sign language together with her. We just began recently to get, in this COVID-19 season. And I've just seen her bloom up, as we are learning the sign language together. And so we are able to do it. And I tell her, when we put a meal there, I tell her, please pray. Initially I kept on telling her, she will tell everybody, pray. And I will turn to her and tell her, now, can you pray? And she'll shake her head. Of course, I understood she's telling me she's not able to pray because she doesn't have the language to say it verbally for me to. She didn't have sign language. We have empowered her, and you should see her. Every mealtime, she'll be the very first one to come in, and you can see her as she goes, oh, God bless this food, whatever it is. And so we do it together. And she's actually now enjoying the fact that she can be given an opportunity to pray. Allow them to accompany you to the supermarket. Do not leave children with special needs out. Do not leave them out. It communicates rejection when you leave them out of the family activities. Fostering, as I, go towards finishing, let me say that fostering in a sense of belonging to the special needs children may begin with our own attitude about them. Inspired by the word of God, we have to realize and accept the fact that children with these conditions are not different from us. We may have to challenge our mindset, challenge our attitude and perception about them. We need to reach out to them. We need to embrace them, and we need to accord them spiritual, emotional, intellectual, and social support. And that will, in fact, be a formal, simple way of becoming a caregiver and an inspiration to others. 2 years ago, I took my child to India for a medical checkup, and I was surprised that the main consultant doctor that checked on her was actually a cerebral palsy, a person living with cerebral palsy, a medical doctor, a very good doctor. When my child could not, took so long to wake up because of being under anesthesia, and the other doctors began panicking, she was wheeled in, and she looked at my child on her wheelchair, from her wheelchair, never touched my child, but she just looked at her as the other doctors explained, what is happening, and turned the child around. And she actually said what should be done. And when that was done, my child was able to get out of that, anesthesia and wake up and walk. And so children with disabilities, as we embrace and draw ourselves closer to our special needs children, we become privileged in realizing their own potentials in terms of their abilities, their talents, their gifts, and also appreciate the fact that they are actually people who are able to contribute very positively to the well-being of our families and the society at large. It may not be a surprise that there may be quite specific and certain areas in terms of performance that may be comparable and similar to those of us who are able-bodied and healthy. Let's embrace them, and let's know that on our part, we need to eradicate the barriers. We need to remove every blocks and bumps that remain known as obstacles on their way to realization of their great potential. And in conclusion, I'm saying that all children have unique strengths, All children have talents, all children have interests, and for children with disabilities, learning and developmental needs require special response, a response from all of us that are around them. We just need to actually be able to see what they are talented in and remove the barriers and obstacles. May you not deny your responsibility nor turn a blind eye to the responsibility for that child with special needs in your family. And may God turn those responsibilities into opportunities to minister to the disabled child in your families. As you do that, look beyond the physical disability and also look at the disabilities that probably are as a result as an injury on the brain. And so they are hidden. And lastly, this is actually a clip from BBC, but it is actually these two girls have grown up with disabilities, and I looked at their stories and I thought it can be able to actually encourage you as a person. And so as I end, let me end with this clip.